Picture this. It's 2009. General Motors is bleeding billions. The government just handed them your tax dollars to avoid total collapse. Pontiac's execution date has been scheduled. And what does GM do with this precious survival time? They build one of the finest performance sedans America has ever seen for under $30,000, then kill it 7 months later. This is the 2009 Pontiac G8 GT. The car that proved Detroit could build a genuine driver's sedan to embarrass the Germans. The car that arrived too late. The car that died too young. The car that nobody bought because GM was busy imploding. Let me paint you a picture of automotive insanity. Under that aggressive hood, with those purely decorative scoops that do absolutely nothing except look menacing, sits 361 horsepower of Australian-developed American-built V8 Fury, 6.0 liters, 364 cubic inches, pushrod simplicity with cylinder deactivation when you're behaving, sequential port fuel injection when you're not, and enough torque to embarrass the accountants who tried to kill it. This wasn't badge engineering. This wasn't corporate parts bin garbage. This was Holden, GM's Australian performance division, building what Pontiac should have been building all along. The L76 engine, Gen 4 small block architecture, aluminum block, aluminum heads, active fuel management shutting down cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7 when you're just cruising, giving you 24 miles per gallon highway in a car with over 360 horses. 9.67 to 1 compression, hydraulic roller lifters, in-block camshaft. The kind of old-school V8 simplicity that mechanics actually like working on, instead of screaming at when the timing chain fails for the 3rd time. But here's the plot twist. This magnificent engine came from Australia, because Detroit had apparently forgotten how to build a proper performance sedan. From the driver's seat, leather-wrapped steering wheel in hand, 6-speed automatic ready to shift, you're sitting in what car and driver called the BMW that Pontiac always wanted to build, and they meant it as a compliment. 5.2 seconds to 60 miles per hour, 13.8 seconds through the quarter mile, 0.88 G on the skid pad, rear-wheel drive balance with a 52-48 weight distribution that's close enough to perfect for under 30 grand. This was the performance bargain of 2009, and GM killed it anyway, because of course they did. The G8 story begins 9,000 miles from Detroit, in Elizabeth, South Australia, where Holden had been building proper rear-wheel drive performance sedans while GM's American divisions were busy churning out front-wheel drive mediocrity and badge-engineered disasters. The Holden Commodore VE. That's what the G8 really was. Australians had been enjoying these cars since 2006, with V8s, and later supercharged monsters, manual transmissions, and suspension tuning that actually worked, while Americans got Pontiac Grand Prix front-wheel drive rental car specials. But someone at GM, probably after their 3rd cocktail at a corporate retreat, had a moment of clarity. What if we imported that Holden sedan and sold it as a Pontiac? Miracles do happen. General Motors announced it in 2007. The Pontiac G8 would arrive for the 2008 model year, bringing Australian rear-wheel drive performance engineering to American showrooms. Base version with a V6? Sure, for people who wanted the looks without the muscle. But the GT, the real G8, would pack that 6-liter V8 and prove that performance sedans didn't require German engineering and $40,000 price tags. $29,995 MSRP. For comparison, a BMW 535i started around $47,000. You could buy a G8 GT and have 17 grand left over for gas, insurance, and fixing whatever GM inevitably screwed up. The G8 GT hit dealerships in March 2008. Perfect timing, right? Wrong. March 2008. Bear Stearns collapsed the week before. The financial crisis was building. Gas prices were climbing toward $4 a gallon. Consumers were terrified. And GM was asking people to buy a performance sedan with a 6-liter V8? Accountants, 1. Car enthusiasts, 0. As usual. Here's what your 30 grand bought you. And this is where it gets interesting. Because unlike most GM products, the G8 GT actually delivered. Rear-wheel drive, 6-liter V8, 361 horsepower, 385 pound-feet of torque, 6-speed automatic, the 6L80 transmission that was actually pretty good, independent front suspension, multi-link rear suspension, Four-wheel disc brakes, though not the Brembo performance setup. Those were GXP exclusive, a genuine driver's sedan, with an interior that wasn't terrible by 2008 GM standards, which admittedly is a low bar. But compared to the W-body Grand Prix it replaced, this was luxury. Motor Trend tested it in February 2008, 5.3 seconds to 60, 13.8 seconds at 102.8 miles per hour through the quarter mile. 0.88 G on the skid pad, better than some sports cars. Car and Driver tested it against the Dodge Charger RT in June 2008, and the G8 won. 5.2 seconds to 60 versus the Charger's 5.7. Better handling, better steering feel, better build quality. The Germans were nervous, the domestics were embarrassed, and GM was about to file for bankruptcy, because that's how Detroit rolls. Here's the thing enthusiasts forget. The G8 wasn't actually a one-year car in the traditional sense. It launched for 2008. It returned for 2009. Production continued into mid-2009, with some late models even designated 2009.5 because GM's model year planning was as organized as their bankruptcy filing. Total production across both years? Approximately 22,629 GT models. That's it. 22,629 rear-wheel drive performance sedans that could embarrass BMWs for half the price. For comparison, Pontiac sold that many Grand Prix models in a single quarter during the brand's peak years. The G8 GT was rare when it was new. It's approaching unicorn status now. But wait, there's more. Because just when GM was circling the drain, Pontiac announced the ultimate version, the GXP. 415 horsepower from a 6.2-liter LS3 V8. 6-speed manual transmission, the TR6060 from the Corvette. Brembo brakes, forged 19-inch wheels, magnetic ride control suspension, limited slip differential, traction control calibrated for aggressive launches. Only 1,829 were built, total. And less than half of those had the manual transmission, which means fewer than 900 genuine 6-speed GXPs exist, before accounting for crashes, modifications, and neglect. The GXP could run 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. It could embarrass M5s at stoplights, and it cost $39,995. That's $80,000 less than the BMW M5 it humiliated. April 27, 2009. General Motors announces it will phase out the Pontiac brand, effective immediately. The G8, along with the Solstice Roadster and the rest of Pontiac's finally interesting lineup, gets the corporate execution order. Production continues for a few more months, then stops. Forever. Pontiac. The brand that built the GTO, the Firebird, the Trans Am, the 6000 GNX, gone. Because GM decided it was cheaper to kill an 84-year-old brand than to fix its corporate dysfunction, let's talk about that L76 6-liter V8, because this engine deserves respect, even if GM didn't give it enough time. Gen 4 small block, aluminum block and heads, total engine weight around 420 pounds. Bore and stroke, 4 inches by 3.622 inches. Compression ratio, 9.67 to 1. Firing order, 187-26543. The same basic architecture that powered millions of trucks, SUVs, and Corvettes. But the L76 had something special: active fuel management, AFM. The technology that let this 361 horsepower V8 achieve 24 miles per gallon on the highway, by shutting down 4 of 8 cylinders during light load cruising. Cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7, gone. Running on the other 4, until you stab the throttle. Then all 8 fire back up in less than 20 milliseconds. That's faster than the average GM executive could make a competent decision. Here's where it gets weird, because GM, being GM, couldn't leave well enough alone. Early 2008 and early 2009 G8 GTs, 361 horsepower, certified by SAE, confirmed by multiple magazine tests, fast enough to embarrass cars costing twice as much. Mid-2009, GM added extra catalytic converters for emissions compliance. Totally reasonable and responsible, right? Except those additional cats killed 6 horsepower, down to 355. 6 horsepower doesn't sound like much, until you realize GM reduced the power of a performance car during its final production run, while trying to convince people to buy it before the brand disappeared forever. Brilliant marketing strategy. Now, and this is important, the G8 GT came with the 6L 86-speed automatic transmission. Only the automatic. If you wanted a manual, you needed the GXP. But here's the thing. The 6L80 was actually good. Smooth shifts when you wanted comfort. Aggressive downshifts when you stabbed the throttle. Manual mode if you wanted control. Paddle shifters if you wanted to pretend you were driving a Ferrari. Could it have been better with a manual? Absolutely. The GXP proved that. But the automatic didn't ruin the experience. It just made the car more accessible to normal humans who didn't want to deal with clutch replacements and rev matching. For what it was, a $30,000 family sedan that happened to have 361 horsepower. The automatic made sense. Even if enthusiasts screamed about it online. Four-wheel independent suspension. McPherson struts up front, multi-link setup in the rear. The same basic architecture Holden used in Australian touring car racing. The GT didn't get the magnetic ride control. That was GXP exclusive. But it had properly tuned dampers, decent springs, and suspension geometry that actually understood physics. Unlike most GM sedans from the era, which handled like boats wearing roller skates. Result? 0.85 to 0.88 G on the skid pad, depending on which magazine tested it. 64.3 miles per hour through the slalom. Better than some BMW 5 Series configurations and handling tests, and infinitely better than anything else Pontiac had built in the previous decade. Four-wheel disc brakes, vented rotors, dual piston calipers up front. Standard setup, nothing exotic, but functional. Now, the GXP got those sexy Brembo 4-piston front calipers with massive 14-inch rotors. But the GT's standard brakes were adequate. 112 feet from 60 to 0 in Motor Trend testing. Not spectacular, not terrible, just competent. For a 4,000-pound sedan with 361 horsepower, adequate brakes. The kind of compromise that makes accountants happy and enthusiasts disappointed. Typical GM. Pontiac marketing loved to claim near-perfect weight distribution. And technically, they weren't completely lying. 52% front, 48% rear. That's close, if you squint, and ignore the actual definition of perfect. But here's the thing. 52-48 is close enough to make the car feel balanced, especially with the rear-wheel drive layout. The G8 GT didn't feel nose-heavy. It didn't plow through corners like a front-wheel drive rental special. It actually rotated properly when you lifted off the throttle mid-corner. Was it a perfect 50-50 like a BMW? No. Was it better than 99% of American sedans from the era? Absolutely. 15 miles per gallon city, 24 miles per gallon highway, 18 combined, for a 6-liter V8 making over 360 horsepower in a 4,000-pound sedan. Those numbers were borderline miraculous in 2009. How? Active fuel management. Running on 4 cylinders when you're just cruising the highway. V8 sound and fury when you need it. Fuel-saving technology when you don't. The best of both worlds. Except, GM being GM, AFM also came with lifter failure issues in some engines. Because nothing good can last forever in Detroit. Especially when accountants are designing reliability standards. Let's be honest. The G8 GT interior was fine. Not amazing. Not terrible. Just acceptable. Leather seats that were comfortable. A dashboard that wasn't actively offensive. Controls that mostly made sense. Build quality that was competent by 2009 GM standards, which is like being the tallest dwarf. Was it BMW quality? Hell no. Was it better than the W-Body Grand Prix it replaced? Absolutely. Was it good enough for a $30,000 performance sedan? Barely. The real interior magic was in what you didn't get. No column shifter, actual floor shifter, revolutionary for Pontiac, and a steering wheel that provided actual feedback, also revolutionary for GM. Let's talk about timing. Because if the G8 GT had launched at any other moment in automotive history, it might have succeeded. But no, it arrived in March 2008, right as the global financial system imploded, right as gas prices spiked toward $4 per gallon, right as consumer confidence evaporated, right as the American economy entered freefall. Who wants to buy a 6-liter V8 performance sedan when they're worried about keeping their job? Nobody. That's who. Total G8 sales, all versions, both years, approximately 38,159 units. That sounds like a lot until you realize that's total. V6 base models included. The GT, the version people actually wanted, 22,629 units across 2 model years, 11,000 per year, in a market where successful meant 50,000 annual sales. For comparison, the Dodge Charger sold over 80,000 units in 2008 alone. The Toyota Camry sold over 400,000. The G8 GT wasn't even a rounding error. June 1st, 2009. General Motors files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, the largest industrial bankruptcy in American history. $60 billion in government bailout money. 40% of dealerships eliminated. Tens of thousands of jobs lost. 4 brands discontinued, including Pontiac. The G8 canceled, mid-production run. Some dealers still had new 2009 models on the lot when GM announced the brand termination. Imagine being a Pontiac salesman trying to move inventory when the manufacturer just announced your entire brand is dead. GM had plans. Oh, they had plans. G8 ST, a sport truck. Think El Camino with the GXP powertrain. Holden built the Ute in Australia. Americans were ready to buy. Production planned for late 2009. G8 wagon, the sport wagon. Holden built them in Australia, and Pontiac promised them to us. But the bankruptcy killed the wagon before it ever crossed the ocean. All canceled, all killed by bankruptcy, all sacrificed to appease the government and bondholders who now controlled GM's future. But wait, plot twist. In 2013, 4 years after killing Pontiac and the G8, GM brings back the Holden Commodore. But now it's a Chevrolet, the Chevy SS, same platform, same Australian engineering, same 6.2-liter LS3 V8 making 415 horsepower, same manual transmission option, even the same magnetic ride control. The Chevy SS was literally the G8 GXP reborn, with worse styling and a Chevy badge. Starting at $44,995, $15,000 more than the original G8 GT cost. GM killed Pontiac, then sold the same car as a Chevy for more money. That's not a redemption arc. That's a middle finger to Pontiac fans. So what's a G8 GT worth today? In December 2025, average condition, about $24,897, which means they're still cheaper used than they were brand new. Depreciation is real. Clean examples with low miles, 30,000 to 35,000. The rare sport package models, maybe 40 grand if you find a collector who cares. But the GXP, that's where the money is. Manual transmission GXPs in excellent condition can hit $61,614 for a car that cost $40,000 new. That's 54% appreciation, depending on mileage and condition. Why? Because only 1,829 were built, and half of them have probably been crashed, modified, or destroyed by now. Rarity plus desirability equals collector value. The G8 GT proved something important. Detroit could build a driver's sedan. American companies could compete with the Germans on handling and refinement. We could make rear-wheel drive performance affordable. And then, we canceled it. Because that's what we do in America. We finally build something great. Then we kill it before it has a chance to succeed. The G8 deserved 5 years of production, a proper marketing campaign, dealer support, brand consistency. What it got? 18 months and a bankruptcy filing. The real tragedy? Australians were driving these cars for years. The Holden Commodore ran from 2006 to 2017, multiple generations, V6 models, V8 models, supercharged V8s, wagons, utes, manual transmissions. Australia got a decade of rear-wheel drive performance sedan excellence. America got 2 years in bankruptcy. Even worse? When GM finally killed Holden in 2020, ending 93 years of Australian automotive history, it was still building rear-wheel drive V8 sedans until 2017. The VFII Commodore with a 6.2-liter supercharged LSA making 435 horsepower. We could have been importing those. Instead, we got nothing. Because GM prefers building crossovers and electric SUVs. The G8 GT represented something rare in modern automotive history. An affordable performance sedan that didn't compromise. Rear-wheel drive? Check. V8 power? Check. Proper suspension? Check. Manual option on the top trim? Check. If you could find a GXP, reasonable price? Check. Compare that to today's options. Want a rear-wheel drive V8 sedan? Dodge Charger, which just got discontinued. BMW M5? $90,000 minimum. Cadillac CT5i Blackwing? $89,000. The G8 GT gave you 80% of that performance for 33% of the price. And we let it die. This is the GM playbook. Build something good. Market it poorly. Support it minimally. Cancel it early. Then wonder why nobody trusts your brand. The GTO revival? Canceled after 4 years. The Pontiac Solstice? Canceled after 5 years. The G8? Canceled after 2 years. The Chevy SS spiritual successor? Canceled after 5 years. Notice a pattern? GM builds excellent rear-wheel drive performance cars, then kills them before they gain market traction. It's not bad luck, it's corporate strategy. But the bankruptcy, yeah. The bankruptcy that GM caused through decades of mismanagement, badge engineering, and prioritizing short-term profits over long-term brand health. The bankruptcy didn't force GM to kill Pontiac. GM chose to kill Pontiac. They could have kept the brand and killed Buick, which sells almost exclusively to retirees. They could have merged Pontiac and Chevy performance divisions. Instead, kill the brand with actual enthusiast products. Keep the brand selling rebadged Opals to people collecting Social Security. Genius. What if the G8 had launched in 2006, before the financial crisis, with proper marketing, with dealer training, with a manual transmission option from day one? What if GM had committed to Pontiac as a performance brand, consolidated all rear-wheel drive development under one nameplate, gave it 5 years to build market awareness? The G8 could have been the foundation for a Pontiac renaissance. Instead, it became the foundation for a Pontiac funeral. Remember, Car and Driver literally called this the BMW that Pontiac always wanted to build. That's not faint praise. That's not participation trophy recognition. That's genuine respect. The G8 GT handled better than the Dodge Charger, cost less than the Chrysler 300, outperformed the Nissan Maxima, made the Toyota Avalon look like a rental car. For $30,000, you got a driver's sedan that could embarrass $50,000 imports. And America bought 22,000 of them, total, over 2 years. Sometimes the market gets it wrong. Sometimes consumers make terrible decisions. This was one of those times. Here's the painful truth. The lack of a manual transmission in the GT probably didn't matter. Not really. 95% of buyers would have chosen the automatic anyway. The 6L80 was smooth, fast, and competent. And America had already moved on from rowing gears and family sedans. But that 5%, the enthusiasts who wanted to shift their own gears, they got ignored, because GM assumed they could upsell them to the GXP later. Except later never came, because bankruptcy. The automatic-only GT wasn't the problem. The timing was the problem. The marketing was the problem. GM's entire business model was the problem. The 2009 Pontiac G8 GT was one of the finest performance sedans Detroit has produced this century. 361 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, proper handling, $30,000 price tag. It could embarrass BMWs, humiliate Dodge Chargers, make Nissan Maximas look like toys. It proved American companies could build drivers' cars when they actually tried. And then we killed it. 18 months after launch, during a bankruptcy, while planning to sell the same car as a Chevy 4 years later for $15,000 more. The G8 GT deserved better. Pontiac deserved better. Car enthusiasts deserved better. But this is GM we're talking about, where deserving better and actually getting better are two completely different concepts. The G8 GT wasn't a failure, it was proof. And GM buried the evidence. If you find a G8 GT today, buy it, maintain it, treasure it. Because it represents something rare in automotive history. A brief moment when GM remembered how to build cars people actually wanted to drive. The G8 GT was Detroit's last great rear-wheel drive performance sedan before the bankruptcy apocalypse. But it wasn't the only brilliant car GM murdered prematurely. If you want more stories of corporate automotive suicide, check out our Detroit's Hall of Shame playlist. Trust me, the pain never stops. And if you enjoyed watching me explain how GM turned $30,000 brilliance into bankruptcy-fueled tragedy, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on the tale of automotive self-destruction. Drop a comment. Would you have bought a G8 GT in 2009? Or were you too busy panicking about the global economic collapse like everyone else? If you're watching this and thinking, I would have bought one, congratulations. You're the reason these cars still matter. This is Car Chronicles, where we celebrate the cars Detroit built right, before killing them wrong.